Another place to get my message across,
but the thing
that would have inspired
me. The Republican convention is supposed to be about the party's platform. That's what it's supposed to be about. And I think
what he was
platform. But I think
I think it was in my Kampf the last time I saw that.
What he was really saying was, vote your conscience.
Have you seen that? I think it was in my Kampf the last time I saw that.
Know good and well that someday there could be a government in power that is shipping its citizens off for disagreements. There are laws on the books now that characterize who might be a terrorist. Someone missing fingers on their hands is a suspect, according to the Department of Justice. Someone who has guns, someone who has ammunition that is weatherproofed, someone who has more than 7 days of food in their house can be considered a potential terrorist. If you are suspected by these activities, do you want to have the government have the ability to send you to Guantanamo Bay for indefinite detention? A suspect. We're not talking about someone who has been tried and found guilty. We're talking about someone suspected of activities. But some of the things that make you suspicious of terrorism are having food, having more than 7 days of food, missing fingers on your hand, having ammunition, having weatherproofed ammunition, having several guns at your house. Is that enough? Are you willing to sacrifice your freedom for liberty? I would argue that we should strike these detainee provisions from this bill because we are giving up our liberty. We are giving up the constitutional right to have due process before we're sent to a prison. This is very important. I think this is a constitutional liberty we should not look at and blithely sign away to the executive power or to the military. So I would call for support of the amendment that will strike the provisions on keeping detainees indefinitely, particularly the fact that we could now, for the first time, send American citizens to prisons abroad. I think that is a grave danger to our constitutional liberty, and I advise a vote to strike these provisions from the bill. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my time.
Big government Republicans and Democrats were busy shredding the last vestiges of the Constitution. Senators John McCain and Carl Levin want to enact a law that would declare the entire United States of America a battlefield for the military. They're talking about inserting the Army into domestic law enforcement. Senator Lindsey Graham, who supports this bill, says, quote, "The homeland is part of the battlefield, and people can be held without trial, whether an American citizen or not." I guess he hasn't read the Constitution recently.
A lethal drone strike on an American citizen on U.S. soil. The Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, won't completely rule out such a shocking scenario. Our Pentagon correspondent Chris Lawrence is working this story for us. Chris, what's going on here?
Well, this has got to come as a big shock to a lot of Americans who may not have imagined that the U.S. government could assert this kind of power here inside the United States. Basically, Senator Rand Paul wanted some explanation about how much power the government has to go after citizens. He got that clarification, and therefore now so do we. In a letter, the Attorney General, Eric Holder, wrote to Rand Paul. He said that authorizing a drone strike against an American citizen right here on U.S. soil, that would be a hypothetical situation, unlikely to occur, and something that he hoped no president would ever have to do. But quote, "It is possible, I suppose, to imagine an extraordinary circumstance in which it would be necessary and appropriate under the Constitution and applicable laws of the United States for the president to authorize the military to use lethal force within the territory of the United States."
Meanwhile, an American teenager killed by a U.S. drone strike in Yemen. His death is sparking new debate over America's use of drones to go after suspected terrorists. Brian Todd has been investigating this story for us. Brian, where was this teenager killed? What were the circumstances?
Wolf, he had set out in Yemen looking for his father. The young man's father was Anwar al-Awlaki, who U.S. officials believe was a key al-Qaeda leader in Yemen. The father himself had been killed by a drone 2 weeks earlier. The family says the son had learned of that, was on his way back to the Yemeni capital when he himself was killed.
We now turn to drones. They're being used. They are the stuff of science fiction, but they've become a key weapon overseas in the hunt for terrorists. Now they are coming here.
In February, President Obama signed a bill that opens U.S. airspace to thousands of these unmanned aircraft. Jeff Glor's been looking into it for us, and he joins us with more. Jeff, good morning.
Erica, good morning to you. Drones right now are where personal computers were in the early 80s, improving at an extraordinary pace, about to become part of our everyday lives. The question is, are we ready? They come in just about any size you want, as large as a passenger plane, as small as a hummingbird. Unmanned aerial vehicles, or as most people know them, drones.
There's no stopping this technology. Anyone who thinks they can put this genie back in the box, that's silliness.
Peter Singer, a military expert and perhaps the country's foremost authority on drones, has watched them dramatically alter the American battlefield overseas. And he says they're about to become the next big thing at home.
They're technologies that not only give you capabilities that you couldn't have imagined a generation earlier, but they're also technologies that cause questions that you weren't asking yourself a generation earlier.
This is Lakota, North Dakota, sparsely populated but now heavily debated, because this is the first known site where a drone was used domestically to help arrest a U.S. citizen. It's the case of Rodney Broussard, a rancher accused of refusing to return a herd of cows that wandered onto his land. When police tried to move in, the family allegedly greeted them with loaded weapons.
You think this was an easy call?
So Sergeant Bill Mackey, who runs the SWAT team in nearby Grand Forks, called in the reinforcements, specifically a Predator drone, a massive aircraft that, up until now, most people associate with Hellfire missiles and terrorist strikes.
This was a dispute over cattle, and a Predator drone was called in. Too much?
Well, I can't really get into what the dispute was over. What I can tell you is the SWAT team wasn't there over a property dispute. The SWAT team was called out to render assistance, reference armed subjects, and using the unmanned aerial vehicle seemed appropriate in this instance.
Broussard's lawyer is looking at challenging the drone use, a potential test case for the rest of the country, because the rest of the country is about to get a lot more.
President Obama defended the recent revelations that the National Security Agency was collecting people's phone records and internet communications.
And by the way, with respect to my concerns about privacy issues, I will leave this office at some point, sometime in the next 3.5 years. And after that, I will be a private citizen. And I suspect that, you know, on a list of people who might be targeted, you know, so that somebody could read their emails or listen to their phone calls, I'd probably be pretty high on that list. So it's not as if I don't have a personal interest in making sure my privacy is protected. But I know that the people who are involved in these programs, they operate like professionals. And these things are very narrowly circumscribed. They're very focused. And in the abstract, you can complain about Big Brother and how this is a potential, you know, program run amok. But when you actually look at the details, then I think we've struck the right balance.
The Electronic Frontier Foundation has put together an informative, interactive timeline of the NSA's history of domestic spying.
Well, President Obama says that if the GOP had their way, they would force him to conduct wars in 7 different countries. Is that true? And is that something the GOP only wants? How many wars is President Obama conducting? This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. Right now, if I was taking the advice of some of the members of Congress who holler all the time, then we'd be in like 7 wars right now. I'm not exaggerating. I've been counting. We'd be in military actions in 7 places around the world, end quote. That was President Obama speaking to a small group of veterans and Gold Star mothers of slain U.S. military personnel, explaining how if it were up to Republicans, the United States would be in military actions in 7 places around the world. So what places is he talking about? Well, when pressed by Yahoo News to explain the president's remarks, a National Security Council spokesman listed Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Somalia, Libya, Afghanistan, and Yemen. The only problem, the president himself has already sent military forces into each one of these places. In Syria, we've sent Marines to recruit and train Sunni fighters who we have called moderates, originally to fight Bashar al-Assad, now to fight ISIS. Right now, the United States has over 3,000 U.S. military personnel still stationed in Iraq, a war that's supposed to be over, a number that has increased as recently as this past June by President Obama. And then, of course, in Afghanistan, President Obama just announced that we're going to keep nearly 10,000 troops in place for the foreseeable future, even though he has repeatedly promised to have ended the Afghanistan war by 2014. And it's not just U.S. troops stationed in Afghanistan. The U.S. military has resumed under President Obama night raids, and we continue to use drones to bomb locations across Afghanistan.
The mission will not change. Our troops will focus on training Afghans and counterterrorism operations.
So what about these other locations mentioned by President Obama? Well, actually, we've been conducting war operations in all of those countries as well. Libya may be the least in recent years, but in 2011, under President Obama's direction, the U.S. and NATO imposed a no-fly zone over that country, and we actively helped in the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi. Then there are the other three countries mentioned, Somalia, Pakistan, and Yemen, where the United States is undoubtedly at war. But this is America's drone war. Well, take Pakistan. According to the Bureau for Investigative Journalism, since 2004, there have been 421 drone strikes. The most recent was a month ago, but 370 of those strikes were under President Obama. The total number of people killed, up to nearly 4,000. Up to 1,000 of those were civilians, and 200 were children.
We are not just going to be waiting for legislation in order to make sure that we're providing Americans the kind of help that they need. I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions.
I do what I want. It was in Kampf the last time I saw that.